Very warm welcome to our third live stream testimony. So we've got a real treat for you again tonight. We have a great guest, Ruth Abbott, who I'm going to introduce in a minute. But just to say hello to those of you who are here already. Hi to Kathleen, to Tom, to Jacqueline and to Trevor. It's great to have you with us. And to Beryl. Hi Beryl. It's great to have you all with us. And anybody else who's joining, we do love to say hello to people. So, announce yourself. But it's okay to be a lurker as well. I will always say that. It doesn't matter if you just want to listen in. That's absolutely fine. You don't have to announce yourself. But yeah, it is lovely to have you. So as ever, with the testimonies, I'm going to be chatting with Ruth in a minute or two. And what we'd love to happen is obviously for everyone to engage as well. So if you have any comments or any questions, they're really welcome. Maybe if something resonates with you, or you just want to say, oh yeah, that happened with me, or I really get that, or maybe you just have a question. That's great, because we'd love for it to be a sort of interactive thing. Oh, and here's Trish as well. Hi Trish, great to see you. So the other thing to say is I just wanted to say a particular thank you to Beryl, who last week has given us an online contribution. So that's fantastic. And we have had other contributions, but Beryl's our first online contributor. So a huge thanks to you for that, Beryl. Hopefully it'll start a trend. Obviously it just helps us to keep going with all the broadcasting as well. So, okay. So I'm going to now welcome our wonderful guest of this evening, Ruth Abbott. Hi Ruth.
Hello there. Hi everybody.
Yeah, so
really pleased to be here.
Yeah, so great to have you here. So Ruth, obviously we're here to hear your story, particularly about faith as well.
Yes.
But first, so we start at the beginning. So tell us a bit about early life and what was that like? Okay. How were you brought up faith-wise?
Yeah, right. So I was raised in Ireland. And didn't bother with it.
Oh, hang on. I think Alex said I think we just lost audio. Shall we start at the beginning?
Right.
So apologies, everybody. I don't know what happened there, but we'll start again with
great.
Beginning of the story,
Lovely.
Ruth. Come on then.
So
tell us.
I was raised in Ireland, south of Ireland, as a Catholic. Sort of late 60s through the 70s, and quite a devout family. We were dragged to church regularly until we were old enough to say we didn't want to go anymore. But I did believe in God. I had the experience, and I'm not sure all Catholics do, but that I didn't have a close relationship with God. There was always a priest in between me and God, and confession, and everything else. So I did reject it as I got older, the whole religion thing. And I moved to England and got married, and then I had always intended my kids to be raised. I got married in the Catholic Church, baptised my two children in the Catholic Church, and then my husband, who wasn't a Catholic, had been raised a Methodist, but he didn't have any faith, became a Christian when my eldest was 5. And I wasn't happy because it was in the context of the Anglican Church. And I had intended to go to the Catholic Church when my daughter was ready for First Communion, which was sort of age 7.
Yeah.
So I wasn't happy at all about this. And he really wanted my kids to go to Sunday school. So I brought them, and they didn't want, not having been inside anything like that church, they didn't want to go. So I used to stay with them. So I had a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I would stay throughout the class. And the ladies were absolutely lovely. I mean, I thought they were really they wore tweed skirts and cardigans, and they were very Anglican women, and they were obviously older than I was at the time. But they were so kind, and they were so patient.
Yeah.
When I look back in it, I think, oh yeah, they were just lovely Christian women. So that sort of went on for quite a long time, and then we moved and we went to a different church, and my husband sort of kept, he really kept inviting me to things and wanting me to do stuff and get involved. And we did get a big circle of friends, which we hadn't had in West Kirby when we were there. So I started sort of hovering on the edge. That was my sort of first introduction to the Church of England, I suppose, really.
So do you do you think you were sort of seeking, or were you just sort of vaguely
Not at the
interested?
time, no. And in fact, I think I was annoyed. So I was really refusing to engage, I think, for a long time. And because I did sort of believe in God, and I felt guilty, I think, for a long time, that my children never made their Holy Communion in the end. And I felt guilty for years that they hadn't done that. So that's obviously the Catholic guilt coming in. But yeah, so then, and I think he was a Christian for about 10 years. Yeah. Really. Okay. And then obviously, when I look back in it, they were obviously working on me, you know, and trying to, you know, sort of draw me in and everything. And I got invited to an Alpha course, which I did. And I had been seeking then, but I think by the time sometimes you get to do an Alpha course, you've already started. But I had been looking after my mum, helping my dad. She was disabled. I had been a nurse, so
right, okay.
And I had given up to, you know, to have when my kids were little, and so they were sort of teenagers, I suppose. And my dad had gone back off to Ireland after my mum died. And I just felt I didn't have a role. And I think it was almost like, is that it now? Am I finished? Is life finished? And I was probably her 40s. Yeah, mid-40s. So, and it was very much like, is that it now? I'm kind of done. You know, have I got a purpose in life, really? I think that was it.
Good question. Yes,
once your kids grow up and you're doing, and obviously I've been a carer and I was in a job, but I hadn't, you know, worked in quite a while. So it was like that part of it, you know, was sort of finished.
So you spent all those years caring either for your mum or your children. So actually, this
and
is
then my job before that was a caring
crossroads
job.
In life.
So I was looking, and then so I did this Alpha course, and then I did another Alpha course, and then I did 3 Alpha courses.
And so what effect did these Alpha courses have on you then?
It was really like, I couldn't get it, I really couldn't get it, and I wanted to get it, and I was looking around at people on the course who got it, you know, who and then some of them were very, you know, came to faith in a big way, and it was all, you know, lovely, and, you know, and the vicar at the time, I was saying to you before, we both knew him, he was a gorgeous, godly man, and he just used to sort of sit there looking all happy, and I'm sure, you know, he obviously had issues in his life, but he just always seemed to be happy to be there, to be spreading the word, to be talking about the gospel. So I really kind of wanted, and then in fact, there was a woman there, she's a lovely, godly woman, and she was talking about her mother, and how when her mother was ill, she'd, you know, her faith had helped her. And I looked back and I thought, if I'd had a faith, and I'd had a really hard time after my mother died, because I was sort of burned out for a couple of months. So I thought to myself, if I'd had a faith, how different would it have been? And that was when I think I really wanted to kind of had a faith. And then so I did. I kind of just made a commitment eventually after like the 3rd Alpha course. I just thought, I got to do it, you know. And I did, and I felt different.
So did it make a difference just making that commitment?
Yes, and I think in the context of not having all the answers, I still didn't get everything. Like the resurrection, I really couldn't get my head around it. And
so
you know,
so how did it work itself, that, you know, in your life, in terms of how you thought about things or what you did it have a big impact at that point, do you think?
It had an impact, and I think it certainly helped me feel, there's something else. And the people who did the Alpha course were medical, and they used to have medical missions to Africa, and they invited me to come. And I think that was a huge thing, because it was Christian mission, but we were doing, you know, medicine and things. And so I basically had a new lease of life in terms of purpose. So it did change me, I think, in terms of that. And I think I'd probably been grieving anyway. I definitely felt I was, you know, I was happier, not in a happy way, but just I had more content. And I used to always be afraid of dying. It was something that, even as a nurse, I wasn't afraid of other people dying. That was
Yeah.
fine, because
Yeah.
there was other. And I worked in intensive care, and I used to, take families through the process.
So you saw that over and over
and
again,
I was
really.
very,
Yeah.
I was able to do it, and I felt I was able to help them. I would talk them through it. But when it came to my own death, I was petrified.
Right.
And I found that changed.
Yeah.
That
okay.
it wasn't any concept of heaven. It was just that the sense that I wouldn't be on my own.
Yes.
Because I think
yeah.
I'd always felt I'm going to leave my loved ones. And that was what I couldn't cope with.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I think that changed.
It sort of gave you a different perspective on it, really.
Yeah, just
yeah.
that certainty that you won't be alone. That you might, I didn't have a particular picture of heaven or anything like that.
Yes.
But it was more that whatever happens, I won't be alone.
Because that was a big thing, isn't it? That when it's realising, I think this life isn't all it is,
Yes,
is it? And
yes,
that knowledge
yeah,
that there's something, something beyond
and you've
as
got,
well.
And it's that comfort, isn't it? It's that, the presence there, that you're not alone.
Yes,
That you've got, you've got someone with you all the time.
Yeah. So in all this, were you then sort of regularly going to church and sort of engaging in, I suppose, religion, not just faith, you know? So that was all part of it as well?
Yes, I started going to church, and I became much more involved with things that were happening in the church. So I started hosting house groups, and that was from the Alpha course, so that they'd eventually said you can't do any more. So, so there was a group of us who'd gone through together, and we had a house group. And so I hosted it, but someone else led it, like obviously someone who was, much more mature Christian. So, and I felt, but I think looking back, it was quite sociable. I think it was very much on my terms. Like I had all these benefits, but I was very much picking and choosing what I was engaging with, or what sort of I allowed God to do in my life, and how far I let God in.
Right.
I think that was probably.
Oh, that's interesting, because I think that's common for a lot of people, isn't it? It's, because it's that, knowing he's there, but as you say, we all love to just sort of keep control, don't we? Certainly
absolutely,
some parts,
because, No,
so,
there definitely wasn't like a giving over of my whole life. It was like, well, I'll give that bit, and I'll give that bit, but I'm keeping this bit. That was,
doing it, so obviously the social side's important. So did something happen to change that then, that sort of perspective?
Yeah, so obviously God was waiting, and he eventually decided he was going to move in. And I've heard of other people who've had that experience, but not everyone does. But I had been to America, and I was jet lagged, and I was sort of asleep, and and I had a dream. But when I woke up, I knew that it was from God, that it was a message from God.
Right.
And
so could you tell us about the dream? Is it something you can share?
Well, yeah. So it was November, or beginning of December, and I had this dream that I read this sort of speech, I suppose, or talk, out at the carol service, and in our church, and I had to go and tell the vicar, who I hadn't met. He was a new vicar, and I hadn't met him, so I had to go and tell him this. Nice. And I spent all day. I woke up from this dream, and it was in my head, word for word. Now, you have a dream sometimes, and you forget. Well, this whole talk was, and it was about, there had been flooding, and there had been, it was really about the isolated, and the dispossessed, and the people at Christmas that aren't enjoying. It was quite. It wasn't grim, but it was certainly not happy. It was thinking about all those people who were lonely and who had addiction problems, and that had never even occurred to me, particularly,
So it was like putting that on your heart as something.
Absolutely,
something had to be done.
Yes, and it was like, we're all here, and it's Christmas lights and presents, and and actually, the sort of young people getting drunk, and drug abuse. It was just everything that's happening that is in the world, which I had never really, I was very comfortable. We were lucky to be well off ish, like that we are, but I just never really spent that much time thinking about other people I cared for other people, and I looked after their health, but in terms of their their social situation. So I had to bring this to this vicar that I'd never met. So I spent all day absolutely mortified and petrified. I think that was and it wasn't, so some people talk about, oh, you know, they have this wonderful experience of the Holy Spirit and it was all, they were full of joy and everything. And it wasn't, it was absolutely horrible. And I felt sick. I was really nervous. Anyway, I did, and this person, and luckily because I was mortified, because I thought, imagine if he just goes, oh, you know, go away, menopausal woman, or whatever. Well, I wasn't quite menopausal, but you know, that sort of, you just leave, you know. Because of course, I had no experience. I had no experience of what this would happen, and I'd always been very suspicious as well of that sort of, you know, Christian who had words from God and was always delivering them left, right, centre, and also having been to Africa, where obviously, you know, they're very evangelical Christians.
Yes.
But they're also very enthusiastic, and they have like 2-hour services, and they sing, and, you know, and they're always sharing words with you. And I was quite sceptical about that. It was more like a social occasion sometimes.
Yeah, okay.
So I went, and he was like, yeah, that's that, as far as I can tell, that's from God. And he was probably so, like, the fact that I was absolutely, like, petrified probably helped as well. I wasn't the kind going in, I've got a word from God for you. I was like really mortified. So, and I think that helped. And so, and then I did end up actually reading it at the carol service. It was very funny. But I think in the end, it was a message for me. It put it on my heart, as you say, rather than the church. But it was a big test, I think. That was what, you know, I knew that if I didn't do it, I would have let God down.
Yeah. So what did it mean you needed to do, if you like? What was your next step? What did you feel like you
So as time went by, the sort of next few weeks after that, I really changed. And that was what was interesting. It was a complete change. And I stopped being able to do, now only sort of for a while, not forever, I wasn't able to read books, I wasn't able to watch television, and I just had this huge sense that I was so far away from where God wanted me to be.
Right.
And it was this sense of conviction that you're not the Christian I want you to be.
Yeah.
And I sort of read the Bible constantly, and I was trying to learn, and it was like I didn't have any idea.
Right.
You know.
So you hadn't really read the Bible a lot before. That hadn't been part of it.
I dipped in and out. I had little Bible notes, which were very sort of short, and I'd read them, and that would be fine. And I'd read them, and I'd think about, you know, what they said, but it wasn't in any deep way.
Yeah.
You know, really. Yeah. And then this was like, so it wasn't pleasant. It was not a pleasant experience. It was
challenge.
It was definitely conviction, as in you're not where I want you to be. And when I look, obviously, further on, it's very much, I wasn't where he wanted me to be, because he had a plan for me.
Yes.
And that was, you know, you need to step up now. Maybe he'd been waiting and got tired of waiting. I don't know.
Yes.
But then, so that was it really. And I think, you know, so I spent quite a few weeks, I would say, maybe a month or so, studying and learning and reading.
Right.
And I remember reading C.S. Lewis. That was so you know, that, and I was just like, It was like, you know, it was
so
like
it was
the
a big learning thing.
It was massive, and sort of being introduced to. And then I read Philip Yancey, the Jesus I Never Knew. I think it was so long ago now. And it said Jesus chose to be poor. And so therefore, if you follow Jesus, you can't not have a heart for the poor.
Yes.
That he chose to be poor. And that was how I felt then. I realised that actually you can't, it's not optional.
No.
You can't say, I'm going to keep away from all those, you know, marginal people or whatever else, you know, that make you uncomfortable, the homeless and the addicted and everything else.
Yeah.
Because Jesus, that was what he chose. So if you want to be in relationship, that's, you know, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you put all that on your heart.
Yes.
So what? Two questions really. I suppose one is how did it change you as a person? You know, did other people see the change in you? Were you very different?
And they were horrified.
Well, people are a bit suspicious, aren't they?
I think my husband, who had wanted me to be a Christian for years, was very taken aback.
Oh my goodness, what's happened to her?
I think he'd been very happy with the first one, you know, if I'd been able to bake nicer cakes. I'd never gotten that, you know, the nice Christian woman who bakes cakes and turns up and all that. So I hadn't quite got the cake baking down. But so he was, you know, it was fine really for him. He was like, oh yeah, this is good. And then I suddenly turned into this slightly wild-eyed, you know, sort of, you know, woman. And also big change in the church, because what I discovered was they they liked me the way I was before. I was very sociable, I was very friendly, I was very predictable, basically. I would host stuff, I would come, I would be entertaining, you know, you'd know if there was a table that, you know, at an event, I would sit at it and I would chat to everyone, and it would all be really nice. And suddenly I was talking about the Holy Spirit and, you know, and they weren't happy, really.
No,
because I was different, and they had liked me where I was.
You were sort of, did you say what they expect?
It was predictable, and I had a role. You know, I was a social person. And they used to call me Mrs. Doyle because I used to make tea, and the Irish, if anyone knows Father Ted, I was Mrs. Doyle, and that's what they wanted. Because if you think of Mrs. Doyle, she wasn't really particularly a spiritual woman. She made the tea, didn't she?
No, so you felt that, you know, you sort of fitted a mould really for the people that you knew there. And actually, when you broke that mould, it was quite a shock to them, probably.
It was, So that all added up to being not a very comfortable time.
Yeah, because it was like, so did you feel that they didn't sort of really recognise what had happened to you then?
I just think there was a few people. Now, to be fair, there were some people who were very sort of godly and knew and came up and said to me, you know, this is God work in your life, and it's really, you know, it's really good. But I think, particularly say at our house group, because I'd been the one who would be popping in and out, and suddenly I'm talking about the Holy Spirit, and they were all like, it was like literally if Balaam's ass started speaking, you know, that was they were like, and I wasn't the one. Normally they had someone else like uber spiritual.
Sure. No, I get that. So it just reminded me, you know, it's a little bit, because that was what happened to Jesus, wasn't it? A prophet in his own town, where people knew Jesus and where he was just the carpenter, you know, the carpenter's lad, and you know, people really struggled to see who you truly was, isn't it? So it's you know, in some sense it's a similar sort of thing, isn't it?
And it actually was, used to seeing you in a certain way. When in fact then I was called into ministry, I had to go somewhere else, and I think it was all, you know, there was a sort of a series of events, but I had been doing an online theology, a distance learning theology module, and my mentor was a vicar in another church.
Right.
So we'd been meeting each other, and I was called in to that church, and I think that was because I would have never gotten anywhere in my previous church, because that was how they saw me.
Sure.
And it was just really hard for them.
I
don't know whether, I'm sure that's not all churches, but I think it is the same with Jesus. You know, when
you're
a certain way,
thing, really. If you suddenly change from somewhere that everybody's used to who you are, isn't it? I think people just find it difficult to come to terms with, don't they? I know I can understand that.
And I think my husband, obviously, I think he found it a little bit difficult for a while, because I'd suddenly become this praying, Bible waving woman, but he was very patient, and he did, you know, he had more to cope with this time.
So then you went to the church. So did it sort of, obviously it changed you in the sense that you were much more engaged in faith and that sort of thing. So as it sort of, is that the main way to change you? Did it change you sort of personality-wise, or has that been a longer thing, do you think?
I think my personality didn't change, but my interest changed, and obviously my awareness of how I should be changed. So I think that was the refining process, which is always not, you know, can be painful, can't it, if you're being refined?
Yes,
you know? So, and I think I was hurt that people hadn't recognised this huge change in my life, or that when they did, they didn't like it. It really hurt me. So when I went to my next church, which is still there now, I sort of just sat there. I wasn't really called to do anything, and it was about a healing thing. I think really, you know, and a learning and a training. I think into you know, in Christian theology and reading books and you know and discussions and getting involved with, you know, sort of learning things. But and then I think obviously grace and patience had never really been something, you know, I'd striven for. You know, and then I suddenly realised these are qualities that you want, you know, the fruit of the Spirit, you know, the patience and gentleness and self-control. So that changed me in terms of, I didn't become a model wife or anything, or mother, but I certainly, if I lost my temper, I would realise that that's not how God wants you to be.
Yeah, it's sort of you get prompting, don't you?
Yes,
so yeah,
yes,
it's sort of
yeah,
you say it's
yeah.
that sort of refining, isn't it?
Yeah, and
Shirley says, by the way, yes, I get it, which I think is talking about what you were saying before about
people not acknowledging.
And also your call. I mean, Shirley's very into what you were talking about, practical mission, feeding people.
Yes,
and
Jesus,
and obviously, feeding those who don't have a lot and that sort of thing. No, that's great. So and then you went through all this. So was that sort of a process of trying to find out what God wanted you to do? Was it, you were saying you got the sense it was linked to helping those who are poor?
Yes.
Yeah. So
and more sort of marginalised as well. I think that's the marginalised in society. As I began to learn, it was like it's not just about physical poorness, it's about spiritual poorness and and the sort of darkness of addiction and depression and loneliness and all of those things that we don't really in the world. People I mean they talk about a lot more now, but probably 10 years ago they didn't really talk about that.
And would you have come across all those sort of things as part of your career? I'm just thinking of your nursing. Are those things that you would have dealt with, or are you looking at them a different way, or did you not really come across that?
Well, I did intensive care at first, which was death was a big part of that. So that was, and helping people cope with the death of their loved ones. Then I did practice nursing, and I loved that you had the interaction. And yes, I was in Prenton, so it was on the edge of Birkenhead. So we did have, we had young mums who, were struggling and that. Yeah. But I looked at it as a sort of a socio-economic thing, support. And I was very good with acknowledging people's depression. But I didn't have any sense that they should have a spiritual aspect to their lives, particularly. And in fact, in the NHS and as a nurse, they don't really encourage you to sort of do that. I mean, people are much more aware now.
Yes,
But you did focus on psychological aspects, psychological illness and that kind of thing. And then obviously social issues, particularly around deprivation. But not spiritual. Not spiritual needs, and not the recognition that, say, some of these things are spiritual. The darkness, it's not just about addiction, it's about that whole, and loneliness.
Those
things that people struggle with, every day.
And Shirley says it was not being accepted when you suddenly realise your call and follow what God has planned for you.
Right.
So that's what she gets.
Absolutely. And it's hard. It's really hard. I think
But then in moving somewhere different, then obviously you're almost starting afresh, wouldn't it be? So I suppose was that an easier journey then in a new place?
After I'd sat there for a while, and I had known I was called, so this church is a lovely old traditional church, but obviously it was full of elder people, more elderly.
Yeah.
And there weren't many families. There was like one family or two families that went. And I really, realised that the vicar had a very evangelical heart, and it was if you don't have a next generation, then this church is going to, to die. And it was, and so I felt called to help her, but I didn't know how. So then I just sat there on, literally just waiting and learning and healing, I suppose that. And then eventually, I think it was about 2 years before I suddenly felt God say, right, this is time now. And I felt really prompted to get involved with young people and the things that were happening, and starting Wallasey Church, and I started doing a youth alpha. So that was that, and the timing was I had decided I'd been away, and I came back to tell, and I had a meeting with the vicar, and I was like just about to tell her that I felt called, and she asked me to do the alpha. So it was like God speaking to both of us at the same time. So that was lovely. It was lovely confirmation. Lovely confirmation.
So you've been involved in various things. So I know that your story sort of moved on further since then as well, hasn't it?
So then after I sort of did that for a while, then I did Foundations for Ministry. I'd had a word from this spiritual sort of mentor person that I had, that she felt that I should explore being a reader
Yeah. So Foundations Ministry. So what exactly is that, Ruth?
Okay, so in Chester Diocese, and I'm not sure about anywhere else, they run a year-long course, and it's basically for anyone in the church who wants to explore what their ministry might be within the Church of England, specifically, Anglican.
Yes.
And you go and you reflect on, your place in the church and what you might be doing.
It's a bit like, so it's sort of about calling, I think, isn't it?
Yes.
It's about sort of finding your God-shaped home sort of thing,
exactly.
Because we've all got something, haven't we, that God wants for us. And it's really hard to find that out sometimes, isn't it? Or to know exactly what it is.
I think that, so obviously it's ordained ministry, reader training and pastoral worker. You have to do it as part of your first year training.
Right.
But other people would
Can
go
do
in
it.
it.
Yes, yeah.
Like, so there was someone who was a church treasurer on my, my group, and it was like he was really exploring.
Yeah.
And I think that idea that everyone can have a ministry, everyone should have a ministry.
Yeah.
And it depends, being
it doesn't have to be something, I suppose, what you say with the title, does it?
Exactly.
We're all called to do
and it doesn't have to be an up the front job. I think that's definitely, that's definitely key. And then I think this man in the end decided he was called to be the church treasurer, and that was but he had reflected and he had learned and I think that so I did the first year of Foundations, and then I went back to my vicar and I said to her, and I hadn't said a word to anyone because I was really waiting to see. And I did say to her, I felt called to be a reader, and she denies it now. But I think she nearly fell off the sofa.
Right. So just explain to people, what does it mean to be a reader? What do you do?
Right.
What's that all about?
A lay reader then is, and the reader part comes, I think it's quite old, it's 150 years old. So, you used to read things, I presume. But like you read things out. But we are a lay person, so we're not ordained in any way, but we're licensed by the bishop to perform quite a lot of functions that an ordained person would do. So we can preach a sermon, we can lead a service, we can do a funeral once you've had the training. You can run groups like baptism groups, and you sort of have a role. But one of the things is that you're in ministry, but you are of the congregation. So you're a part of the congregation, and you're sort of in that, and then you're a bridge that they sort of see it as a bridge. And I very much felt that I was a bridge between, some people aren't comfortable talking to the vicar if they've got a problem. So they would talk to me because they didn't see me as, I'm not ordained. So it's like, you're less threatening, aren't you? And then I could bring problems if needed, to the vicar. So that, but then obviously that was a huge learning curve as well, because I had never even considered doing a sermon in my life.
That's a big challenge.
And I think what was very interesting about that time was I had been a very confident nurse, and I was quite senior by the time I left, and I used to do a lot of teaching. And I would teach other nurses, and I would, I could stand up in a seminar and do whatever. And I became completely inept. I was so nervous. It was very funny and
strange, isn't it? Yes, I think I can identify with that.
And I think it's the knowledge that actually this is for God, and this is preaching God's word. It's like, oh my goodness, this is like huge. And also, I think obviously science and health. You sort of think, right, well, there's something wrong with this person, and then you fix it. There's a treatment. Whereas having people's spiritual welfare, if you said something that really upset them or threw them off track, or you didn't do it, I'm not suppose that you did it right, but it's just that you have people's spiritual well-being in your hands, and that was huge. I felt that was a massive responsibility.
It's a big responsibility, isn't it?
So I was absolutely rubbish when I started. It was very funny. And my congregation were lovely. They were so supportive, and it was like a journey we were both doing. So they did give me lots of feedback. And some of it was probably not negative, but it was certainly, well, you need to look at us when you're speaking, or you need to slow down. And that was all about nerves. But it was mainly because they were really interested. And I think, God calls you as you are. Because I was really entry level. That was part of it. I was sort of, hadn't been learning theology for a long time. You start to preach once you start your training. So it's like you're quite unformed. So because I was really being basic, they liked that a lot.
Yes,
and
yeah.
they felt
yeah.
we had things in common.
Okay.
You know, so it was about us
good.
going together.
Yeah,
So that was really good.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So, you know, we've talked a lot about obviously how your call, if you like, your sort of coming to faith has sort of affected what you've done. So, but when you look back, you know, and you talked about before you came to faith, probably when you had a fear of death and how you'd cope with your mother's death. Can you see the difference between, you know, presumably things have happened in your life since you've come to faith. You know, how has having that faith made a difference to what's happened to you in life since you've sort of found Jesus?
Yeah, I definitely think so. My father died about sort of 5 years ago. It'll be this year, and it was a very different experience because I was praying and people were praying for me. And I felt that, you know, I was still tired and exhausted, but I definitely didn't collapse the way I did, and I was much more able to sort of put it in the context of, you know, that this is not the end, and you know, and it was something actually my mother had been very devout person, very spiritual, not just, you know, sort of Catholic in terms of like she just went to mass. She was a very spiritual woman, and my father really acted like a Christian, but he never really talked about it.
Right. Okay.
And he went to church with her, and after she died, he stopped going.
Right.
And I really felt I had to sit down with him and say, you know, what do you believe? Because you know, she's in heaven, so you know, do you want to be there?
Yes.
And it was hard. It was a hard conversation to have, but I really because I wanted to know
what he thought,
and so I wanted to know that where he would go. That was really what I wanted, that certainty. So he was like, no, it's not that I don't believe. Right. I was like, fine, because I said, you know, she's there. So, you know, and he went to mass for 6 weeks.
Right. So you prompted him.
So, and then he didn't really, but he was such a good Christian man in terms of how he lived his life. And he never spoke about it. But after he died, we found out all these people he'd been supporting and all this sort of thing.
Right.
But so I would have never had that conversation with somebody before. So it's given me confidence. And people in my family, on both sides of my family, they're sort of quite strong atheists and that.
Yeah.
And I'm confident. It's not that I'm trying to evangelize them, but in fact, my faith, it sits comfortably with me. So I don't feel stressed or embarrassed. I just talk about, and I'm able to talk about my faith in a way I think might hopefully want them to think, oh, you know, that's how I felt when the godly woman talked about how her mother died.
Yeah, and you think it's something that you want, isn't it? I think that's often how it starts, isn't it?
And it's
People
the fruit of the spirit that, you know, the patience, the peace, and the, you know, the peace, and I think that's been huge for me in my life since, is the whole thing about peace and serenity. I've definitely felt that's something that, you know, to try and cultivate in your life. In terms of prayer and you know, to not be stressed, to not be worrying, to look for peace and contentment, and
because that's one of the biggest things, isn't it? It says over and over again in the Bible. It's one of the hardest things, isn't it? But I agree. I think like that sense of peace is one of the big things that is different, I think, for me as well.
And I think also people want to be happy, but what's happy? You know, and then people think, well, if I have a really nice holiday, or if I have a really nice car, or if I make a certain amount of money. And as time goes by, that doesn't. But that sense of peace and serenity, and it's the peace of God, isn't it?
It's whatever the circumstances, isn't it? I think that's the difference, isn't it? Because, you know, we can all we all go through really hard times, don't we? But I think what you're saying is right, isn't it? It's when you're going through those hard times, but you can still have the peace and even the joy, can't you, of actually that underpinning of knowing that he's there, and, you know,
and joy, I think joy is different than being happy, isn't it? And joy, as you say, can exist in the context of something awful happening. And so that's a really, you know, it's a wonderful gift, isn't it? That, you know, that you can have the joy of the Lord, even in, you know, when something terrible is happening.
You know, so that's a huge difference. That's great. So you're so now you're into your reader ministry, well into that really, and enjoying. So has that been that you feel that's what your call has been ultimately, isn't it?
Well, I'm not sure. I think God he's opening more doors, but I'm just exploring. So I'll probably wait and see.
Yeah, you watch the space, because by the looks of it, Ruth, you're lots of, sometimes it's when you are not expecting things that things happen as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Shirley says, the joy of the Lord is my strength.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes, yeah. Absolutely. And strength, I think it does. It helps you. And I think in terms of my preaching and my talks, I mean, obviously we've had lockdown and so many people, I think people are aware now of loneliness and isolation.
Yeah.
Everyone is aware of that now, whereas before it had been the marginalised. And so really speaking into that, into acknowledging that for people, it is, and that's where God can help us.
Yes, and also everybody. I mean, it's difficult to be secure anyway, but I think a lot of us have got things that make us feel secure. Jobs and perhaps money and things. And, but what this lockdown did, and is to throw everything up, because so suddenly nothing was certain anymore, and that's absolutely. I just think it's just actually knowing Jesus and having God in your life makes such a difference to that, because you've got that rock, haven't you? And
and I think the things that have come out of the pandemic for the church, like online ministry, and the fact that we all, and my church, God bless them, a lot of them are very attached to the building, and it is a lovely building, and it really helped them realise that God is not the building, that we are church wherever we are, and we're a church family, and that really did help, I think, people to realise that it's not about, and if you're a traditional Christian and you go to church and it's about preserving your heritage, that's not. It's about being a church family and supporting each other and loving each other.
Around you,
that's right. And so I think all the lessons that we've sort of learned and taken from, it's like God worked through this pandemic. He and the Christians that were doing things in the pandemic, and the feeding people that they were doing, and the sort of dealing with the homeless and all of those things. This is where I think Christians came into. They came into their own, basically, and I think so. Something happens worldwide. It's terrible, but God can use it, I suppose, and because of us trying to live, sort of godly lives. That's our role, isn't it? To and what was also interesting was I felt I needed to participate and help, and so I had given up nursing, and I re-registered. So they have an emergency pandemic register, so I went on that and I trained to be a vaccinator. And I never thought that I'd be doing that again. And it's where God leads you. You think, I never thought, and it was lovely, because there I was, the Christian minister coming out into the world and helping. And it's like every, whatever your gifts are,
just use them. Sometimes
so I felt it was wrong to not use that experience and training. And so then I've been a vaccinator.
I'm sure you've been a big asset there, Ruth. Yes.
Well, and I think it felt like such a privilege to do it. I think that was when we were all there doing it. It was very, very busy for a time. Most people were like that. You really felt this is actually a privilege to be helping.
Yes,
it's
part of the effort, isn't it?
So that wasn't a sense of it was we're so busy. It was actually like
And I think it's done that, hasn't it? Brought out that spirit of cooperation and people trying to serve the community, serve the effort. So, no, thanks, Ruth. That's been really great to talk to you. And hang on. Shirley said, absolutely, there will always be the poor and the hungry. Jesus said that too, didn't he?
Well, he did. He said they're always with you. Aren't they? And I think one of the things I suppose that's really nice is that our church is a small, sort of semi-rural, and there aren't any homeless in it. They're not there, and people are well off. And so I did feel that we had to start doing things, and one of the lovely things that happened was we have a lot of elderly ladies, and I really felt that we should just do something for the homeless. So I suggested, I'd been looking up projects, and I found a church where they knit blankets for the homeless. So I'd said, if anyone wants to knit some squares, that would be really nice. And literally, I was overwhelmed. And it's 2 years later, and they're still all knitting.
Yeah, right.
And so we go out. We had been going onto the streets of Liverpool, and we had a contact who had been very engaged with the homeless, but then obviously since COVID, but we've been giving them to the Charles Thompson Mission.
Right.
And it is that when we gave the blankets out, we were saying, the ladies of St. Nicholas, should I have said that?
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Have knitted this for you.
Yeah.
And it was love.
It's a lovely way of them doing something,
they can,
isn't it?
And they couldn't get out themselves.
Yeah.
But they were participating in Jesus's call on their lives to look after the homeless. And the blankets are bright and lovely, and they're new as such. And going around Liverpool, and we would sort of do it before Christmas usually, they were so pleased because they were bright and they were new and they were for them. And then we would say, it's been knitted for you.
Yes,
especially.
So it's special.
Now in the scheme of things, it's not going to help homelessness. It's not going to, but it's about showing love.
Yes,
and,
it is.
And that really taught me, because I think even as a Christian, I would be embarrassed when I saw a homeless person and I would not look at them, and I might put money in their cup or something, but I wouldn't really look at them. And having to engage with them, having to look at them. And then the person that we were with initially, she used to get the stories and talk to them, and she was just so natural. And the stories were like amazing, and you're just like, this is an ordinary person who became homeless.
Absolutely, by the grace of God, isn't it?
Absolutely. So that really helped me and taught me.
So I am sure Ruth and I will have mutual acquaintances, Shirley says. All right. Well, Kathleen says, thank you for a very inspirational testimony.
Oh, thank you.
So, that's great. No, it's been great to talk to you, Ruth. It's a fantastic story. So Alex is going to come in and say something now. By the way, Ruth and I have been friends for a long time. I didn't actually know all that, Ruth, despite the fact I've known you for a very long time. So it's been great to hear all the details.
Well, one of the privileges for me has been being on Elaine's journey, that we were sort of came together in the context of neither of us was in ministry at the time.
No, that's right.
But we both had the Holy Spirit working in our lives, and we came together and we used to pray and talk. And that was an immense privilege, because Elaine having to go on her path towards ministry. And I feel I have a role in supporting that. I've had several people in my life now where I've just been encouraging them and recognising God has this ministry, and maybe from my own experience, not being encouraged at the beginning has helped me.
Yes, because he has something for all of us, doesn't he?
Yes, and
sometimes
when that
you
person,
it's about
so I've
recognising
had a few people where I've been in a sort of mentorship role, where, and I am a mentor now. They have, because of COVID, the diocese reader and pastoral worker training, they have split us up into little groups. They asked, would you like to be a mentor? So I have 2 people, and it was Zoom. Hopefully we'll be doing face-to-face, and it's helping them, supporting them in their training, and just, and it was great, because I'm not what you'd consider to be an academic person. I always pass my exams and things in nursing, and so to have to get my head around writing theological essays. And one other thing I did do, which I'd forgotten, is that after, sort of during COVID, but after reader training, I actually did a Bachelor of Theology, which I'm sure God is going to use in some way. But it was real. There was only 2 of us out of all of our group who ended up doing it. And I think, for people to be theologically trained, that, I think it's the fact that the diocese, you can do this, you can go straight from foundations all the way through, to be having. I can encourage people who don't think they're clever enough or they're academic enough, or because I did find it hard, and I found it hard at times. Absolutely, writing essays, and doing all that
when you're not used
reading.
to it.
And I mean, I like reading theologically, but if I'm forced to read something. Not happy.
No. I know the feeling. Oh, that's great, Ruth. Thank you. Let's see, Alex, have you got something to contribute here?
Hi, Ruth. Good to see you. As Kathleen said, very, very inspirational. There's some really, really good points I was listening to on that. I like the start of it, where you talk about really, it's like the wobbly development of faith. You kind of like, I made that commitment. I'm not even sure what that looks like. And then you kind of realising, actually, over time, you've kind of figured out that, I think I just need to up my mic a little bit. You've kind of figured out that actually God has a ministry for you, and what does that look like? And I like the way throughout your testimony you talked about the patience of waiting, and that's fantastic, because I know you pretty well, and you know, exercising that patience is great. It made me it made me think about when I came to faith. I was kind of like, I had this image of like wandering around the Lido of faith, you know, and dipping a toe in.
Yes,
and that was it.
Absolutely.
And then watching someone come bashing through the doors and doing the biggest bomb, and you think, hang on, this isn't going to end well. And I think that was the thing. And you were talking about as well when you were talking about, and it was almost like, again, you know, with Jesus not being accepted in his own town. And I think when people come to faith, and this often happens, from my understanding is, people won't shut up about God.
No, you were like that, weren't you?
You won't shut about it, because you suddenly got like your Jesus shades on.
Absolutely.
And you're bulletproof, and then that at some point has to come crashing down. So there's kind of like this huge up, and then there's a bash, and then there's like back up again, and that patience, and that's really good. It was really good the way that you explained that. I definitely understood the concept of when you were talking about moving from church to another church, and I know that Shirley made the same observation, and that was great. But it resonated with me as well, because people knew me, they knew my backstory, you know, and of course when I kind of then opened my arms and said, "Come and get me, Jesus," you know, it was like, but isn't he the... Do you know what I mean? It's the same sort of thing as that.
And I think also the fact that you felt very strongly you had a ministry, but you didn't know how it was going to work out and what it was. But people didn't necessarily accept that, did they? That was the point, because they knew you, and it was the new people who took you at face value when they met you, who then acknowledged.
Don't get me wrong, there's nothing worse than Christians, do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Exactly, and I get that completely, and of course you as well. The other thing is that, and I really love this concept, you talked about the joy in the context of pain. And that's something that's affected me in such a huge way. And it's actually made me so much stronger in my faith, is that when you go through hardship and you have the sustaining support of Jesus Christ in your life, it's like suddenly it's like I can handle a lot more. And actually through that you recognise as well that you go through a painful experience, but you learn so much from it. It's like, this is incredible. It's like, you know, okay, that was painful, but actually what I benefited from it, and I talk about that in my past life before being a Christian, I think that was all set up by God. All of the bad things that happened in my life, which I say actually probably self-inflicted, but all of those things gave me some sort of authority to discuss things with those people that you talked about, which were the marginalised, and I thought that's so valuable.
Beryl said, I think this is in relation, Ruth, to you saying that you're supporting pastoral workers and people in reader training, because Beryl is going for pastoral worker training, and she worries, it's about the writing, sorry. She worries about the essays and the project, so Beryl's just about to start pastoral worker.
Congratulations,
just on
Beryl.
foundations.
So no, I wouldn't worry. I mean, I think one of God's purposes in having me doing a bachelor's of theology was I was probably the least academic in the group, and we had all the spiritual, you know, gurus, and then we had the dum-dums over the other side, and I was definitely in the dum-dum camp, and yet there was me and one other person who ended up, you know, doing it. So no, I think if you've managed foundations and you've managed the writing in foundations, you get help. And you have to ask for help, and there's lots of, and if you need to ask Elaine for little hints and tips, I have lots of little tricks to get through the theological part of it, and you know, it's like everything. There's medical speak, there's lawyer speak, there's also theology speak, and you learn to sort of phrase what you're saying, you know. And I had a problem with that at first, because academic theology is not accessible.
No, it's quite a different language a lot of the time, isn't it?
It is.
Yes.
And I also felt
I
part of my role was I now understand it and I can read books that are quite academic, and then I can interpret that for my congregation who sort of feel I'm doing the hard work, and that's great. And then they benefit. And that's part of my role. So no, Beryl, I think that you'll be fine.
Yes.
But if you need any little you'll have a mentor now, so I think that's if you're in the Diocese of Chester.
Yeah, so that
you will
help.
have a mentor, and I'm the first to say I found it really hard. So to encourage people,
it's a great
you will man. And the other thing is, if God has called you to this ministry, you will succeed.
Yes,
that's
that's absolutely true, isn't it? Because He'll give you whatever you need to do it. Because that's definitely been my experience. Particularly when you just think, there's no way I can do that.
Yes.
Or there's no way this can happen. If you've got a conviction about it from God, and you're sure you discern that, if it doesn't go away, isn't it? Then He always equips you.
Yes.
He's never let me down.
And you focus on that, because there were times when I was really struggling with just the whole concept of it and the whole theology, and I knew I was called to do it, and I knew this was God's plan in my life, and I just had to put up with it. So there was a lot of things that I didn't really like that I just kept going with, because I knew I was called. And then obviously when you finished, you are doing, so no, I wouldn't. And there's not as much emphasis for pastoral workers on preaching. So I think that part of it is actually less academic. So, if you're called, you'll get there.
You will.
Yeah.
So, no, thanks, Ruth. That's great. Yeah. Hang on. I think Alex might have another question.
So, the only last point I had, and I think this is quite important as well, is you were talking about fear of the marginalised, which this I find quite difficult, because I think that we develop strength, I think, through faith. But if you've lived a life where you haven't really had those meetings or anything with people that have been, say, homeless, or people that have had drug addiction or alcohol addiction or stuff like that, people are very often quite nervous about how to have those conversations. And I totally get that. I really totally get that. It's very hard for people to do that. But I do think that, with the support, the spiritual support and the support of people you work with in ministry, that we want to be able to do that. But that takes courage. And it does take courage. I remember somebody making a comment once, and this was actually, it was a really difficult thing to try and take in. And it was like a block of flats, and what they'd done is they put the spikes at the bottom so that the homeless people couldn't fall asleep in the doorway to this block of flats. And the comment was like, this is just really awful, how can you do that, and things like that. And I sort of thought, well, hang on, there are people that live in these flats that don't have a relationship with these people, and often will have a fear, because of course what comes with the marginalised is often a huge amount of stereotype views or that kind of thing. And we have to be patient with that as well. As well as we have to do that, we have to look at it from both sides. And some people, I've known people who are in the church who are, very, very quiet women, very prayerful women, and very easily spooked, if you will. And we don't expect to send them out to, greet a load of people that are a yob in middle of a riot, is it?
Jesus loves you.
Exactly. So it does take a courage, and it was just interesting that you pointed out that there was a fear that you wouldn't look somebody in the eyes, because actually half the time
quite common,
you don't know how to deal with people.
It's an embarrassment. And I think though, what pushed me was this knowledge that Jesus chose to be poor, but also that these people had great value to Jesus, that this person at the side of the road, who obviously, as you say, there's a lot of problematic behaviour. They could have been drunk, that, a lot of them were on drugs by the time, when we were handing them out. And Jesus loved them, and they are as valuable to him as I am. And it's that acknowledgement and that reaching out, you know, and not thinking we're going to fix the problems of
and
homelessness.
you know, absolutely.
But,
and also, so we know from our experience of that, Alex, 2 years ago as well, it's just but for the grace of God.
Absolutely.
You know, there are so many different stories and things, you know, about what happens to people that just, you know, we're all a few steps away from that in reality.
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
So
and it's not just,
you know,
you're on drugs and then therefore you become homeless.
Yeah,
As you say, there are people who've had careers and money and families and
but
just,
absolutely.
you know.
The media and the stories that you'll hear are always the ones that stand out. So, of course, you know, this homeless person held up a shop with a knife, of course. Yeah. But this guy who lost his job and ended up moving out of the family home and lives in the woods. Nobody knows about him. You know, so that's how we all come this kind of like sensitized to what's really going on.
Sure.
Yes.
You know. So that's really interesting. I'm gonna back out and let
I just want to finish off on comments.
So I'm gonna back out and leave you guys.
Okay.
It's great to see you, Ruth.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, great.
Okay. So Shirley, thank you for the encouragement, Ruth, and also said that she says, I don't do well in the street with the homeless, but I love those isolated and in poverty and happy to help. We all have a different call. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I think even, so we have one lady in our church who does the food bank, you know, and we bring food in or money or donations, and she, you know, gathers it up and brings it. And that's vital, you know, because I think the food bank is you know, is become more and more important. It's a real, you know, heart. But this person literally she's an organizer. Yeah. And she organises and she, you know, she brings it physically to the food bank. Yes. And that's because it wouldn't matter how much we all wanted to help if you didn't have that person.
Doing it. No, that's right. Because sometimes people think their call isn't important because a lot of people are a step in a process, you know, but actually that's not true because everything is just as important.
And I think, to be fair, I sound like I'm going out like Mother Teresa. I mean, to be honest, we would be doing this once a year, twice a year. But my, you know, talking to the elderly ladies is that you can knit.
Yes,
you can knit, and because you can knit, we're going to reach out to these homeless people. And that was really, it's about the gift that, and they've not stopped knitting. It's hilarious, and I still have bags and bags of squares, and that was really lovely how it took off. But and I think also in our church, you know, I'm not particularly organised, particularly technical, and there are people who are. And they are very logical and technical and organised. Yeah. But because we're different, it all works together to produce the whole. Yes. And that's the whole thing, isn't it, about the body of Christ? And so, yes, there will be some of us who will feel called to be out on the streets. Yes. There are some of us who
have
will
be very quiet ministry, which is just as valuable, isn't it?
And I think also, you know, the loneliness of the elderly or the people who, you know, who will live on your street. Yeah. You know, who that has come to the fore.
It has, that's what Shirley saying. I think the hiding and struggling are the majority. We just don't. Yeah. Well, Shirley said there's lots of people struggling and hiding. I think Alex has put it. I think the hiding and struggling are the majority. We just don't hear about it as much. Yeah, I think the pandemic probably has. I've highlighted that more, but there's just so many people, as you say, that we don't see them because lots of people are struggling and they don't come to the forefront. You know, that perhaps just shut away at home and just in their really hard times, aren't they? They're difficult places, and and I know Shirley's got a heart for finding those people. Kathleen says, an elderly disabled lady once told me, if you can do nothing else, you can be a prayer warrior. Yeah,
absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And as Alex said, we've had, you know, we do have elderly ladies as well, and there are some really amazing women who will just pray. Yeah. You know,
well, but that's really the powerhouse, valuable. Isn't it? You
I'm sure there's men as well.
Yes,
I'm not
but
being
prayer's the powerhouse.
Sexist.
Everything needs to be under prayer, isn't it? And it's so important. So that is probably it's hugely important that people are doing that.
And that's the part of it as well. I think that God will have a role for you in your life throughout your life. That, you know, yes, you might be very active, you know, at the beginning of your life or in the middle, you know, and as Alex said, you have this huge sort of, you know, thing about faith, and it's great, and then something happens, or you know, you go through a sort of a trough, don't you?
Yes, because becoming a Christian doesn't stop life from being difficult.
You might become disabled, you might become ill, you know, you get older, we all get older.
Yeah, things happen that you don't expect.
But God will always have a purpose for you. Yes. And, you know, even if it is prayer.
Yes. Yeah, sure,
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. So no, that's great. Thanks, Ruth. We'll let these good people go. So thank you to you for coming in, and thank you to everybody. Great. Thanks for engaging our chat. It's been great to have your comments as well, and so it's been really good. So we shall see you again next Wednesday for another amazing testimony. But thanks so much for coming, and thank you, Ruth, as well.
Thank you, and
great.
bye everybody.
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
bye.
Thank you.